Control Malaysian 370. Morning, level 250, Malaysian 370.
On March 8, 2014, at exactly 1:19 a.m., over the South China Sea, a voice came through the radio frequencies from the cockpit of Malaysia Airlines Flight 370. "Good night." They were routine words pilots have said thousands of times throughout their careers. The message sounded completely normal to the air traffic controller in Kuala Lumpur. Nothing unusual. No errors. The plane was just about to leave Malaysian airspace and enter Vietnamese airspace. Everything was fine. But 2 minutes later, something happened that remains unexplained to this day. The aircraft's transponder suddenly stopped transmitting, and the plane was never seen again. What happened? A Boeing 777 carrying 239 people simply vanished into the sky. What makes the story truly terrifying is that the plane did not crash at that moment. It continued flying for 7 more hours, silently, without any communication, without a single distress call, and without any explanation. What could cause a modern aircraft, equipped with advanced technology and safety systems, to simply disappear? What happened after that last radio contact? And where did Flight 370 go during those missing hours? This is the story of the greatest mystery in aviation history. A mystery that still has no definitive answer after all these years. And now, let us take you back to the beginning, to the minutes leading up to the catastrophe. On Saturday, March 8, 2014, at exactly 12:41 a.m., Malaysia Airlines announced the departure of Flight MH370, which took off from Kuala Lumpur International Airport in Malaysia, heading for Beijing, the capital of China. It was scheduled to arrive at 6 a.m. On board the plane were 227 passengers and 12 crew members. The captain was one of Malaysia's most experienced pilots. And the aircraft, a Boeing 777, had a fuel capacity allowing it to fly continuously for 7.5 hours. For that reason, Malaysia Airlines relied on it for one of its 2 main daily flights between Malaysia and China. The aircraft used for Flight 370 had been operating this route for 11 years without any technical issues. So, it was expected to be just another routine flight. But about 40 minutes after takeoff, specifically at 1:19 a.m., the plane was flying over the South China Sea, just about to leave Malaysian airspace and enter Vietnamese airspace. The Malaysian Air Traffic Control contacted Captain Zahari Ahmad Shah, informing him to establish communication with Vietnamese Air Traffic Control, as they would now take over monitoring the flight. Captain Zahari replied, "All right." That was the last time anyone ever heard his voice. About a minute and a half later, the plane completely disappeared from radar screens. It never entered Vietnamese airspace as planned. Tension and anxiety quickly spread between Malaysian and Vietnamese air traffic controllers. They immediately began searching for the aircraft and contacting airports near the last known location, hoping perhaps there had been a technical issue and the captain had been forced to make an emergency landing. But unfortunately, all responses were negative. There was no sign of the plane. At exactly 2 a.m., the Malaysian aviation authorities declared an emergency. They continued reaching out to all relevant agencies in neighboring countries, hoping that someone might have detected the aircraft, or at least received some kind of signal. They held on to that hope until 6:30 a.m., the time when the plane was supposed to land in Beijing. At that very moment, the families of the passengers were waiting at the airport. They noticed the unexplained delay, and the authorities were forced to officially announce that Malaysia Airlines Flight 370 was missing. Television stations began covering the story, and the news spread across the world. When the families of the passengers learned that the plane had enough fuel to fly for 7.5 hours, they became convinced that their loved ones were still alive, especially since some of them tried calling the passengers' phones. And the calls actually rang, but no one ever answered. Chaos and panic broke out at Beijing Airport. Families demanded that the government take immediate action to save whoever could still be saved. The pressure and tension on Malaysian authorities increased dramatically, and they were forced to send out a massive air and sea search team, with assistance from China. A total of 34 aircraft and 440 ships. But unfortunately, the first day ended with no news at all. No wreckage. No trace of the plane. During the following 2 days, the search continued without any results. People began to believe that the plane had suffered a catastrophic failure, possibly exploding shortly after the pilot's last radio communication. Telecommunication companies explained that the calls families mentioned were false signals, because international calls passed through multiple connections before reaching their destination, which can sometimes make the caller hear a ringing tone, even before the recipient's phone actually rings. Based on that, everyone assumed the passengers had died, and the search team's mission was now to locate the wreckage. But still, nothing was found. Then, on March 10th, 2014, officials received information that completely changed the course of the investigation. The plane's journey did not end at the point where it disappeared from civilian radar. It had actually changed its route and flown in another direction. This discovery came from Malaysian military radar, long-range systems that detected the aircraft continuing to fly. However, while this gave investigators new hope, it also made things far more complicated. The radar data showed that the plane had turned back toward Malaysian territory, flew all the way to the city of Penang, and then headed northwest toward the coast. And half an hour later, it disappeared once again, this time because it had flown out of the range of military radar coverage. It left behind countless unanswered questions. What made the captain suddenly change course? Why did he return to Malaysia? Why did he then fly the plane toward the Indian Ocean? Who turned off the communication systems and cut contact with air traffic control? And if we assume the plane was hijacked and the captain was forced to follow that route, why didn't the hijackers contact any authorities during the 4 days that followed? So many questions arose after the news spread, and people began forming their own theories to explain the disappearance. At that time, Malaysia's Prime Minister, Najib Razak, stated that the aircraft's transponders and radar communication systems could not shut down on their own. Someone had to manually switch them off from inside the plane. That statement led to two main possibilities. Either the plane had been hijacked and forced to change its course, or the person responsible was the captain himself. To narrow down the investigation, authorities began checking the records of all passengers on board to see if anyone had a possible motive to hijack the aircraft. But nothing suspicious was found. There remained only one strong possibility, and many began to believe it, that either the captain or the co-pilot was responsible for the plane's disappearance. Flight 370's captain, Sahari Ahmad Shah, had joined Malaysia Airlines in 1981, His professional record showed exceptional skill and over 18,000 hours of flight experience. The first officer, Farik Abdul Hamid, had 7 years of experience flying with Malaysia Airlines. Both were known for their dedication and professionalism, and neither had ever faced any complaints or disciplinary issues. But what placed them under suspicion was the fact that no one else on board had the authority or access to disable the aircraft's systems or alter its flight path, except the two of them. So investigators began digging into their personal lives, hoping to find any clue that could explain what had happened. The investigation started with Captain Zahari Ahmad Shah, the pilot in command and the person with full control of the aircraft. Malaysian authorities searched his home and discovered that he had a flight simulator set up in his private room. But that wasn't strange for a veteran pilot who loved flying. He even had a YouTube channel where he showed his flight simulator setup. What was strange, however, was what investigators found when they examined that simulator. They discovered flight data dated a month before the incident, showing a route very similar to the one Flight 370 eventually took. It looked as if the whole thing had been planned. One theory suggested that Zahari had deliberately made the plane disappear as part of a carefully calculated plan. He knew that the point where the aircraft would leave Malaysian airspace and enter Vietnamese airspace was a blind spot, the perfect place to change the plane's direction, without immediately raising alarms among air traffic controllers, the crew, or passengers. Another theory claimed that Zahari had intentionally depressurized the cabin, simulating an emergency situation. At such a high altitude, breathing would become extremely difficult, and the oxygen masks would automatically drop. This would ensure that passengers remained seated, calm, and unaware of what was really happening. But the passengers' oxygen masks only supplied air for about 15 minutes, while the pilot's mask could last much longer. After 15 minutes, everyone on board would lose consciousness, without realizing what was happening. At that point, Zahari could descend the plane to a lower altitude, where he could breathe normally without a mask, and continue his plan in silence. His return toward Malaysia was later interpreted by some investigators as a final farewell to his homeland, especially since the aircraft passed near his birthplace, the city of Penang. But even if we assume that's what happened, what would drive a man who loved aviation, a man with a family, children, and grandchildren, to do such a thing? And where was he trying to take the plane? After several days of continuous searching, everyone became convinced that all the passengers were now dead. Yet no one knew where the plane's final location was. The Indian Ocean is the third largest ocean in the world, making the search almost impossible. After a week of searching, specifically on March 15, new information arrived from the British satellite company Inmarsat, providing coordinates of a possible area where the plane was believed to have gone down. They managed to communicate with the plane using signals similar to heartbeat pulses, one pulse every hour. By analyzing the timing between those signals, along with calculations of fuel consumption, flight speed, and distance, they were able to estimate the plane's final location, somewhere off the coast of Australia. They confirmed that this was the most likely spot where the aircraft had gone down. Although this greatly narrowed the search area, the zone was still enormous, stretching about 110 kilometers long and 225 kilometers wide, right in the middle of the ocean, a completely isolated region, far from any form of life. And that's where the largest and most expensive search operation in aviation history began. The designated search zone was about 1,400 kilometers from the Australian mainland, near the country's western coast. It would take Australian search vessels 2 full days just to reach the site. And that was the first major problem, because the plane had crashed there a week earlier, and the powerful ocean currents would have scattered the debris far and wide. Even though Australia wasn't directly involved in the incident, it pledged $60 million and deployed some of its best search teams, alongside ongoing efforts from China and Malaysia. After 15 days of continuous searching, no trace of the plane was found. Then, suddenly, their equipment picked up a strange signal coming from beneath the water. But before they could celebrate, they discovered it was interference caused by the sonar systems on their own ships. Meanwhile, a team from Curtin University in Australia had been building a network of sensitive underwater microphones along the Australian coast to monitor seismic activity. When they reviewed their recordings, they found an unusual sound. A strange signal detected an hour and 15 minutes after the plane's last known contact. They suggested that it might have been the sound of the aircraft hitting the water. The Comprehensive Nuclear Test Ban Treaty Organization later confirmed that their equipment had also detected the same underwater sound. But that sound was detected from a much farther location, which led investigators to consider 2 possibilities. Either they had been searching in the wrong place, or the sound had nothing to do with the aircraft at all. Perhaps it was caused by geological activity under the ocean. So, they decided to disregard those signals. After 40 days had passed, Malaysia, Australia, and China decided to bring in the most advanced sonar equipment and deploy submarines to explore the ocean floor. It's worth noting that 99% of that part of the Indian Ocean had never been mapped or studied before. But they had no other choice. They had to take the risk and push forward. Even then, they found nothing. Only remnants of old shipwrecks and pieces of coal. After an exhaustive 15-month search, covering an underwater area of 60,000 square kilometers, there was still no trace of the missing plane. Then, exactly 1 year after the incident, on July 29, 2015, a group of young people on the beach of Réunion Island, a French territory, stumbled upon a large white metallic object washed up on shore. They quickly realized it was part of an airplane. Authorities were immediately notified, and investigation teams from several countries, led by Malaysia, were sent to examine the debris. Tests confirmed that the object was indeed a piece of Flight MH370. It was the first physical evidence that the plane had exploded or broken apart over the Indian Ocean. Following this discovery, the Malaysian Prime Minister officially announced that there was no longer any possibility that anyone on board had survived. The news caught the attention of Blaine Gibson, an adventurer and independent researcher. He believed that if one large piece had drifted there, other parts might have followed the same ocean currents. Determined to help solve the mystery, Gibson made it his personal mission. When he consulted with oceanographers, they explained that based on the movement of the waves and wind patterns, the debris should have drifted toward the coasts of Madagascar and Mozambique. So Gibson traveled there himself, searching every shoreline for more fragments of the missing aircraft. Over time, he managed to collect 20 pieces of metallic debris. 7 of them were later confirmed to belong to the wreckage of Flight MH370, but they were all small fragments. But as for the larger parts of the aircraft, there was no trace of them anywhere, despite the massive efforts by multiple countries and a budget that reached $200 million. The search for the wreckage officially came to an end in 2017, after nearly 3 continuous years of exploration. To this very day, no one truly knows what happened to Malaysia Airlines Flight 370. So, tell me, my friend, what do you think really happened to Flight MH370? Share your thoughts in the comments. And until we meet again, in another story, one even more mysterious,